When you live in a demographic where everything that could go wrong does, internally, externally, so many difficulties that we face. And then the question becomes, how do you deal with them all? And if this was some sort of ranking system, which issues are higher on the list of importance versus others? And then the question that feeds into the concept of this discussion, which is, what if we lived in the same world, but we just had more marriages / nuclear families? And that will be the concept that I share my views on, what I think the world could look like. And since we haven't lived in that world, I can only just base this on my perception. So I could be wrong, or maybe I'm missing certain points. But it's something that we ought to theorize within ourselves, because we have such, like the scripture says, the harvest is plenty. We have such a harvest of lives. There are so many singles that it doesn't make sense that there are still so many singles. I mean, you would think within the amount of singles that are available, there would also be prime opportunities to create community, family, marriage across the board. These are viable singles, the harvest being plenty, but the laborers are few. And in our demographic, that sentiment can be applied to so many different factors, not even just the lack of marriages, but even the lack of us really working towards, as a collective, our own best interests. Specifically focusing on us for a change. Ideally, this will influence us to think differently about marriage, not just romantically, which is ideal in its own ways, but strategically, structurally, and begin to harvest ourselves for the greater good. Let's bring our collective into an idealized future. What if we lived in the same world, but we just had more nuclear families? And when I say the same world, I mean externally we were not valued. And when I say more, I mean the majority of us were married and we had nuclear families. So the external side of us would be dichotomized against the internal, the external representing those that despise us on the outside, the internal representing our high range of families on the inside. Do you think it would be the same world? Do you think we would have the same frailties and difficulties? Or do you think it would be a different world? Would we aspire to that world if it would somehow be better? Should we? Could we? Or should we try to change what others think and make that a better world just by what they think about us? Because in my viewpoint, if we had the same conundrums externally, but we just had more nuclear families, well, firstly, in order to have more nuclear families, you would have more in-law families. And your in-laws are the families that your spouse is related to. So in a world where we are despised and cut off from material resources, or other groups serving as a resource to us, it would force us to rely on each other as a resource. And considering the in-law families that are increased in a highly married society, we become like a living phone book. Anyone could be someone that has something or knows something, and we would have to be creative in how we find these people, how we access them as a resource, how we use these people, because we would know the outside groups would not have our best interest. But knowing this while having our family groups means I don't think would be as reliant on other groups to stimulate us mentally, emotionally, creatively, because everything would come from the scale of how could we serve as a resource to one another. We would be more resourceful so that the things that other groups did, and we were already in a functional context, we would build from there to counteract that. But when you're hated and vulnerable and disunited within, that can't be conducive. I believe that if we had more nuclear families, then we would create our own inner world. Endogamous families, or a term that I created, BICR, Black intercultural families, we would be constantly fortifying relationships on a worldwide scale because somewhere, somehow, someone has the resource. I think we would be more politicized to have to unite because we would be in a better mood. We would see each other from higher esteem, and it would just be building like a building block, since we had so many intact families, building from there. We would respect each other more. They would see our values and we would see their values, and we know, oh, okay, they love their families, we love our families, they're our people on a physical level, and they can become our people on other levels, including marriage-wise. We would create a wall of defense because we would see the shared reality we're in. We don't see ourselves from that angle now because we don't raise our children to know who they are. We are simply on a neutral level existing and thinking the world as is, or the world that we think it should be, is the world, when we live in an anti-life, anti-black world and anti our very sentience. Everywhere we exist, we are hated, and we don't combat that hate even in our own homes, let alone the fact that we're not even creating homes. We're creating people that are unaware of their predicament, and because they're unaware, they can't be resources. But in a world where you were hated and you were more married, marriage being intentional, marriage being a merger, marriage being an allegory, marriage being a binder, marriage used as a tool, that would force you to be aware. And you're creating offspring through those marriages that have intact homes at large, so you're creating a society that's more malleable, more conducive to your best interests. Other groups, they would hate you, but they wouldn't be able to use your frailties as a weapon against you. They would have to try a lot harder to dismantle us. And I would think we were equivalent to them psychologically, and since we became creative in harvesting our resources, we would be equivalent to them in many other categories, so that if they tried to dismantle us, it would be a counter culture, so that it would be at least an even fight. But when you have just women and children, and the counter narrative is the vulnerabilities that they have, and the men are scattered or compromised, then how is that a stronger unit? At least they would have to put more force countering more people, and we would have a greater wall of defense, so that everything they did, they would be countered with something we do. And I would think they would not like us, but they would fear us or respect us, considering, let's say, population data. Let's say we had high rates of families and we did it like the Bible said, and in some cases had large families. Or if we had high rates of families and you look at the population data now, so maybe we would have had higher population than other groups and a unified wall of defense. I just don't think we would be in a position that we were vulnerable. I'll even take it a step further and just go into the biblical commandments, which are often about marriage and family, especially for the vulnerable people of God. And that's really the premise of Deuteronomy 28, is to be in covenant. And if you're aligning to covenant, I actually just think we would be supernaturally blessed. Other groups wouldn't even begin to harm us because there would be supernatural provisions for us. That I think they would still hate us, yeah. Maybe for different reasons, maybe because of jealousies or insecurities, many other reasons. But I don't think their hate could be weaponized, that we would be more protected than we are. And I think our self-esteem would be higher because we're seeing all this love being saturated within. We're creating everywhere we are, coalitions, actively supporting ourselves. We would be mentally way more prospering and way more joyful to realize this level and depth of oneness within ourselves. And I don't like separation rather than unity or accumulation, because separation is scarcity. Accumulation and unity is abundance. While we are having a marital and family scarcity, other groups are not. If you were to somehow marry the quality with the quantity and not just have quantity, because right now we are divorced as a people, so we are divorcing quality from quantity, we're divorcing quantity from quantity. The numbers themselves within us, if they are somehow larger, are not beneficial because we haven't resourced them to our benefit. If we marry the quantity with itself and see that quantity matters, then it would lead to us realizing that quality within quantity matters. But the goal should be both at all chances, because the quantity makes you harder to attack because there's too many of you to thwart, and the quality of being on the same page, being unified, makes you harder to separate. And separation can be used as a tool with a predatory force that can make you vulnerable. Not just that they're separating you, but the way they separate you. With stirring conflict through paid forces or funding wars, this is making more than one thing happen at the same time. It's making us harm each other so that we can't blame this on others. And it's removing ourselves from seeing ourselves as a resource. Rather than constantly being at odds, we have to understand the predatory nature of being separated. And also the tactic of separation, that if you look up the stages of abuse, one stage of abuse is to isolate the victim, and to then, through isolation, cause the victim to think that the people that are in their life are their enemies. We need to not allow the forces outside of us to isolate us and to divide us, and then to emerge a new narrative within us, because it's not going to somehow build us. All the anti-life forces within us, and somehow we still exist? There are living beings, dinosaurs and whatever else, that are extinct because of the forces that were anti-life against them. And yet, with all the anti-life forces, from the psychological to the material to the physical to the environmental to the biological to the chemical, etc., that are used against us, and we still exist? Imagine if we were to resource upon that resilience. What more could that do for us? And in every level of marriage, as an allegory, in every level of, if we had more families, that's more abundance of our identities, from phenotype to cultural to international to different classes. We would all have to be unified in that level of oneness and establish marrying the group to itself. And when I say marrying the group, I'm talking billions of us being on one accord. One of these people could be your resource. You wouldn't want to offend them, and also you don't know if you could build that family with them. I think we would be way less harsh in judging each other's differentiations. We would even have way more resources because we would have a way to create an inner economy. I'm speaking immaterially, not just materially. We are very creative, and there are times that we've had zero and we still were able to create out of nothing. We would be that much more resourceful if we have all these other people with us, rather than the poverty of bloodline and the poverty of our environment. Mentally wealthy through us as a bloodline, wealthy through us as a human resource, we could also physically be wealthier as well. our familiarity, confidence, and respect for each other would be increased because it would be the counter to what other groups were doing. And since we're actively aware of what they're doing in that model, and we're raising our families to be aware in that model, then we would know each other from a level of not trauma, even though I'm sure it would be somewhat traumatizing knowing that we were hated, but knowing that, hey, well, at least we have someone that gives us refuge. At least we know we have someone that helps us to survive. At least we have this entire community. I'm pretty sure that we would be very silly at that point to bypass all of us and then try to get the value of others at that point. We would have more trust in each other because we were present in our homes, and there wouldn't be this concept of absent fathers because the fathers are in the home. There would be, for the opposite sexes, a greater reputation, and there would be, for the people born into that community, a greater sense of trust because we could trust you with our offspring that you're raising. Let's say if we have an adult son or daughter, we can trust that you're going to even marry them, so we can feel more like, hey, well, if we can trust them, they give us incentive, then we can work towards further cultivating and harvesting that trust. And our confidence in each other would be more structural because we could see that we could rely on each other, which would force us to have to deal with the people in ourselves that would threaten us. So the rogues, we would deal with those people because we know they could harm the human resource that we are trying to develop. We would have a greater code of honor to deal with the rogues within us, which gives us even more resources because as we deal with those rogues, the rest of us will begin to see it and say, okay, we don't want to be put in that situation. It incentivizes more of us to behave so that we can be qualitatively shaped. We wouldn't just be resourceful because these people are our resources and essentially our only resources, but when you're resourceful, you want to make sure the resources you have are conducive. So we would constantly qualitatively shape ourselves as resources to be more marriageable so that we can incentivize more families to be created, that we can have no excuse but to rely on each other. It is my perception that we need to see the fathers as being a part of our homes because that would push us to understand what a family is supposed to be. The father is family. The father is part of us, and the father is us. The father is part of the reason we exist. There wouldn't be such a stark difference in class because there would be more generational wealth. Because when you're in broken homes, you can't even psychologically begin to function in a way that raises your morale. But when you have functional people being born and raised at large, it gives them more ideas, more intellect, more ways to produce wealth. A way less traumatized person to even begin that dialogue. If we had more families, there would never be a gap between us historically and us modernly, so that there was somehow a disparate reality between the historical nuclear families and what we now see as a scarcity of present-day nuclear families. And if there was less of that gap, then that in and of itself is the constant affirming of identity. It'd be clearer to trace our history. It'd be clearer to trace our oneness. It would be clearer to know why we are in this together. Likewise, we would expand the dialogue. We would know, okay, well, formerly the nuclear family looked like this, but then we could evolve it. Just like other groups, they expanded on the nuclear family, not rid it completely, but evolved maybe the hairstyles or the traditions or the dress code or whatever. we could constantly expand on dialogue rather than have to start over because we don't know what the dialogue even is. In my perception, I think if we lived in that world, we would thrive in that world. That the hate that other groups have against us is not our threat. It's our vulnerability. It's our disunity. It's the ways they mind control and weaponize different narratives. It's the anti-life proportions that we feed into. But if you think of all the unities we've had throughout our history, we were in positions that were very compromised. And through our unity, we're able to reject those positions. And that was just when we, on a circumstantial level, felt, okay, we have to unify for this event. But unity should be our lifestyle, our gospel, our heritage, our way of life, everything we do. And I think we could create that world. But we would realize unity is way stronger than any efforts to externally become valued. One nation, under God, one bloodline, under God, unifying, marrying our God to our people, to us marrying each other, levels and dimensions of marriage on a worldwide scale. What the Bible says is Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 14. And that section talks about how other nations would fear us, but they couldn't harm us. How we would be extremely wealthy, above pretty much all nations. Because think of all the things that God has for his people that he chose and the promises. Also think of our qualities. When we do have good moments, it gets really, really good. It can be even legendary. The kind of music we create, we've invented many things. There's so much we've done when we've really just had no other choice. But if we made that our lifestyle, I just think it would be beyond the world we live in, like a heaven and earth, literally a kingdom of people. I really think we would be unstoppable. And if the mind game is, well, that's not true, you guys would still be inferior, I don't know if I believe that, to be honest. Maybe other groups would still try to make us feel inferior, but I just think on every level, psychologically, and every level, we would just be way better off. So that even hate wouldn't stop us from rising.
Concept Chapter 2. Monolithic Populations. Are black people a monolith? Should black people become a monolith?
I often hear it said that black people are not a monolith, and I always hear that being stated typically in response to what another group thinks. So that begs the question, number one, why does it matter if they think we are a monolith? Number two, why is it a big deal to be somehow whatever the opposite of monolith would be? Because when people say, oh, we're not a monolith, they think that's a good counter argument. They think that's reasonable. They think it's logical to say that they're not. I guess in their minds, they actually think the word means identical. But what if we were identical? What's so bad about becoming identical in the ideal ways? What if we identically had a structural way that we viewed ourselves and we were constructive, orderly, reasonable, and on code, so to speak? And we had a code of ethics that benefited our mental health, emotional health, our way that we valued each other? What if we were strategic and identical in that way? Would it be so bad? I don't think so. Because if we were identical, but for the things that were productive, then it's like, I don't even have to debate you if you think I'm a monolith. I don't even have to make it seem like this is a bad thing because the qualities that you want me to somehow distance myself from are too great. And I don't even think people should debate, oh, black people, we're not a monolith, because we're not a monolith. There's way too many differentiations of whether it's tribe. You got people that live in the same countries, but let's say they have different tribes, there's going to be conflict. You've got people that live in the same countries, and let's say they don't have tribes. There's going to be conflict. This group is way too divided to be questioning whether they are a monolith. This group has way too much self-hatred to have to prove anything to other groups about whether they are a monolith, because I have a harder time telling other groups apart when it comes to mentality, because they are so aligned constructively. They have behaviors they fulfill in the millions and billions that it's easier to think that they are a monolith than for them to think that we are. And at that point, if you have to debate whether you're a monolith or not, and you look at the depravity that makes up our world, you know it doesn't make sense, because other groups are way more united. Other groups are way more fortified. They have all the ideal qualities that advances them socially amongst themselves and makes them have oneness and familiarity with themselves. So they are, in my book, a monolith. And it's also rarer for them to depart from the typical ways, so much so that not only would I notice things about them, but there could be people that I don't even know who are in my collective that notice the same things about other groups, spanning different countries and different environments, and we could still know the same trends exist. So they're more of a monolith than we could ever be. I don't really hear them ever say, oh, we're not a monolith. One, because I would think they're lying. Two, because in what ways are other groups not a monolith? They operate either in silence or overtly. The silent ones can't claim to be our allies if they don't speak out against the things that are harming us. I don't think that there's such a massive amount of them that actually care about us at all. I don't think that they deviate or even want to go against people that are in their group for the most part. And I'll give examples of why I think they are a monolith. Number one, how many allies from them do we actually have? Historically and in present terms. It's so countable that we can actually descriptively say those individuals' names. But when you look at the patterns throughout time, how could people be enslaved for hundreds of years? Hundreds. We're talking centuries of centuries, at least 4 centuries. And you mean that groups of them couldn't say, hey, maybe this is wrong? So whether they were one religion or another religion, one perspective or another perspective, the norms that were against us kept going, which meant they operated as a monolith no matter what their viewpoint is. So why are we the ones that try to deviate from being a monolith when it's not apparent anywhere else?
Reshape your definition of the term monolith. We are making monolith out to be a negative term, but in actuality, it is an ideal term we must strive towards as a population.
And you also have to stop talking about monolith as if you're using the definition accurately. You have to stop saying we're not a monolith. If you think the definition of monolith is to be identical, it's not. Actually, I don't know why anyone keeps saying that. Why do people keep associating monolith as being the same? Why do people keep associating monolith as being identical? That's not the dictionary definition. Because the actual definition of monolith has nothing to do with similitude. It has everything to do with strength and power. It has everything to do with something that, if you actually read the dictionary definition, and I've made a video about this, would be something that you would benefit from if you were a monolith. There's 3 definitions in the dictionary. Let's say, for example, the Merriam-Webster definitions of monolith. And not one of them is the word identical. Number 1, a single great stone, often in the form of an obelisk or column. And it gives the example as a granite monolith stands at the center of the park. So when you think of, just based on the example and the definition, think of a cliff. Think of an obelisk, like Stonehenge. That is a monolith. Number 2, it says a massive structure. And it gives the example as the 70-story monolith is one of Europe's tallest buildings. So when you think of a monolith, think of skyscraper. Think of a massive building. Number 3, an organized whole that acts as a single unified powerful or influential force. And it gives as an example, the movie company grew into a monolith of the entertainment industry. So when you think of a monolith, think of any organized system that is powerful. Banking systems, etc. So between 1, 2, and 3, whether it's a great stone, a massive structure, or an organized whole that is unified or powerful and influential, why wouldn't we want to be that? Because why wouldn't you want to be great, like a stone, like a mountain? Why wouldn't you want to be a massive structure? Those are two things that could be great, massive and structure. We lack so much, you would think the opposite of lack is massive. And you would think we would strive for things that are massive, rather than so much scarcity. You would think we would strive for things that are structured, rather than so much chaos. And I'm not sure why you would have anything against being organized, unified, powerful, influential, and a force. So a monolith has been connoted as something it's completely far from. It's not a bad thing to be a monolith, because that's how other groups maintain power over us. That's how other groups maintain power over this world and its resources. They operate like a monolith. Anything that wants power needs to do is be a monolith. Because let's put us as the word monolith here. Black people being a single great stone, often in the form of an obelisk or column. If you want to metaphorize that as us being hard to beat, hard to destroy, I can't just go up to a stone and just do anything with that. You can't pick up a stone very easily. You can't break up a stone very easily without the impact harming you. Being in a position where someone would have to think twice before harming the thing that is stone-like. If we are stone-like, metaphorizing the stone as our emotions, we're not easily emotive enough to be manipulated. If we were a massive structure, we could use our populations so that it's not just numerically inclined, but structurally and qualitatively inclined, so that the numbers could benefit us rather than be our hindrance. Those numbers, not just to count them or to look good, but to know that that's numerous people that make it difficult to divide, which means if you can't divide them very easily, they're structured into oneness, it makes it difficult to perpetrate against them. If black people were an organized whole that acts as a single unified, powerful, or influential force, well, I would hope that's pretty self-explanatory. I've always heard people brag about, oh, black people are influential. Well, there's certain qualities people don't copy, and for a reason. They may copy artistic elements, but they don't copy structurally what we do. They're not copying at high rates the broken home dynamic. Other groups, they have extremely high rates of marriage that across millions, billions, across different cultures, across classes and religions and political affiliations and ways of thinking, they're all acting as if it's just one person every single time. And that one person every single time is accumulating into this monolith of families, monolith of marriages, monolith that they're establishing within oneness, because as they accumulate marriages, they are creating in-laws, alliances. And as they are accumulating marriages, they're not just creating populations. Although the population data is a very thorough dialogue, I will summarize it to say that they are not the majority in terms of the numerical output, but they do have the majority of influence. So you don't have to be on an extreme level of prominence numerically to be powerful. You just have to be a monolith. And that's what other groups are. They may not be as numerically abundant the world over, but they are monolithic. And if they can benefit on their level as a monolith, how much could we qualitatively shape it if we were as leveled as they are, but acted as a monolith? A monolith as a big stone or as an influential or powerful force cannot be easily destroyed, but we can, despite us having certain numbers. It's really interesting. You have people talking about our melanin and their beauty and, oh, we used to anciently do this and all this other stuff, and yet you're easily conquered and destroyed. So those qualities doesn't make us somehow more powerful than the other groups. It's being a monolith that makes you more powerful than the other groups, because being a monolith is to constantly fortify the group via unity, via order, via structure, via enhancing its intelligence, which you can't enhance a group's intelligence if you don't even build them psychologically, if you're constantly exposing them to trauma, if you're constantly abandoning your offspring, if you're constantly abusing people with harsh words and extreme criticism. That is not fortifying us at all. And that's what our group is doing, which is dividing us. We're already in a vulnerable position, and we are making more enemies within each other. Whether you want to connote monolith as being identical, if you were identical in good ways, it wouldn't be such a bad thing. And whether you are wanting to look at the actual definition of monolith, there is nothing that I can take from the actual definition that would somehow make this a negative. The response shouldn't be, no, I'm not a monolith. The response is, how do we become a monolith? And at that point, if anyone were to say, well, black people are a monolith, and we were the actual definition, then our response would then be, yes, we are, and I'm proud of it. Looking at us as the case study, you could see why you wouldn't want to be in our position. And so if other generations were to dichotomize, if they became a monolith in the future themselves to what we are, they would know that what we are is nothing to aspire to. And they would know they have to feed the culture of becoming a monolith. Also, when you look at other groups and you dichotomize what they are as compared to who we are now, you would realize being a monolith isn't so bad after all. My name is Gershly Karen Peer, and I'm pro-marriage and pro the nuclear family. Stay tuned for more.